Something in you is dying right now, not dramatically, quietly, without your permission, and the terrifying part is, it is the best thing that has ever happened to you. You stopped recognizing yourself about 6 months ago, maybe longer. The version of you that existed before the one with the clear sense of direction, the reliable emotional responses, the relationships that fit without effort, that version has been quietly leaving. Not through a single event, not through a crisis you can point to and name, through a gradual and deeply disorienting process of becoming someone you have not met yet, while simultaneously losing access to the person you have always been. You have been explaining this to yourself as burnout, as depression, as a difficult season that will pass once the circumstances change. But the circumstances keep changing, and the feeling does not pass. It deepens. And underneath the deepening, underneath the confusion and the grief of it, something else is happening. Something that Carl Jung spent his entire career studying. Something that he believed was the most important psychological event available to a human being. Not available to every human being. Not automatic, not guaranteed, but happening to you right now, whether you have words for it or not. The 7 signs I am about to describe are not a checklist. They are not a personality assessment. They are a precise map of an interior territory that most people enter without a guide and exit changed in ways they cannot account for. If you recognize yourself in what follows, not as flattery, not as a comfort, but as an accurate description of what is actually happening, then what you need is not a reason to be alarmed. What you need is a map, and that is what Jung left behind. Stay with me through all 7, because the 7th sign is the one that changes everything about how you understand the first 6. And if you leave before you reach it, you will have the discomfort of the process without the one piece of information that makes the discomfort bearable. The first sign is one that most people misread as a problem with the relationships rather than as evidence of something happening inside them. The people who used to fit in your life have started to feel like they belong to a version of it that is completing, not because they changed, because something in you is changing in a way that the existing relational architecture cannot accommodate without adjustment. The conversations that used to produce genuine engagement now feel like repetition, not because the people are less interesting, because you are arriving at those conversations from a different interior location than the one they were built around. You find yourself saying the things that are expected of you in certain relationships, the responses, the humor, the emotional register that everyone in the dynamic has learned to count on and feeling. In the moment of producing them, a specific gap between what you are saying and what you are actually experiencing. You have been calling this disconnection. You have been wondering if something is wrong with the relationships. Something is not wrong with the relationships. Something is happening in the relationship between you and yourself that is creating a natural distance between the person those relationships were built with and the person who is arriving in their place. Jung called this the dissolution of participation mystique, the unconscious, merging with other people's emotional worlds that most people mistake for intimacy. When it begins to dissolve, the relationships do not feel less real, they feel more exposed. You can see their structure for the first time because you are no longer fully inside it. The people who can grow with this shift will still be there on the other side. The people who cannot will create friction before they create distance. Both responses are information. Neither is the verdict on the relationship's worth. But here is what Jung understood that most people going through this do not know yet. The discomfort of the relationship shift is not the sign that something went wrong. It is the sign that something went right, that the self underneath the social architecture has become strong enough to be felt, and that strength has consequences for every dynamic built around the version of you that existed before it arrived. This is sign 1. It is not a loss. It is the beginning of a very specific kind of clarity that most people spend their entire lives never developing. The second sign arrives differently. It does not announce itself through relationships or external friction. It arrives in the interior, in the specific quality of silence that has appeared in places where there used to be noise. You used to fill the silence automatically, with plans, with entertainment, with the next task, with the reliable hum of forward momentum that kept the interior experience at a manageable distance. And then, at some point that you cannot precisely identify, the filling stopped working. Not because you stopped trying, because the silence started feeling different, not empty, present, like something in the quiet was more real than anything you were using to cover it. You have probably interpreted this as a warning sign, as the absence of motivation or drive, or the aliveness that used to make the forward momentum feel natural. But Jung documented this specific shift in patient after patient, and he named it precisely. He called it the introversion of libido, not introversion in the personality sense, but the inward turning of psychic energy that occurs when the unconscious is pressing something toward consciousness, and the conscious mind's usual strategies for avoiding that something are no longer adequate to the task. The silence is not the absence of something. The silence is the presence of something that has been waiting for the noise to stop. The question that most people do not ask, that most people are too uncomfortable to sit with long enough to ask, is what is actually in the silence, not philosophically, specifically. When the distractions run out and the noise stops, stops and there is just you and the interior experience you have been managing around the perimeter of your ordinary life. What is there? Jung believed that what is there is always more useful than what you have been using to avoid it, not more comfortable, more useful. The silence is not a symptom of the individuation process. It is one of its primary instruments. It is the condition under which the unconscious can finally be heard. And what it has been trying to say in your case, in this specific season of your life, is more important than anything the noise was telling you. This is the second sign, not the loss of drive, the arrival of a different kind of listening. The third sign is the one that most people feel most ashamed of, and the shame is part of the sign. There is an anger in you right now that does not have a clean target, not the anger of a specific grievance with a specific resolution, a deeper anger, the kind that surfaces in the middle of situations that are objectively fine and makes the situation suddenly not fine, the kind that arrives when you are doing something you are supposed to want to do, and the doing of it produces not satisfaction but a specific frustrated heat that you cannot explain to anyone around you. You have been managing this anger very carefully. You have been filtering it before it becomes visible. You have been converting it into politeness and patience and the functional emotional regulation of a person who understands that their anger is disproportionate to the visible cause. But the anger is not disproportionate. It is precisely proportionate to the actual cause, which is not the situation you are in, but the situation you have been in for much longer. The accumulated weight of a self that has been performing rather than living. The specific frustration of a person whose actual nature has been accommodating the requirements of the performed identity for so long that the accommodation has become physically exhausting. Jung called this the return of the repressed affect, the emotional material that was suppressed in the service of the social identity's maintenance beginning to surface as the identity's grip weakens. The anger is not destructive. The anger is information. It is pointing with the specific accuracy of something that has been watching for a long time, from a position of complete visibility at everything in your current life that is organized around the performed self rather than the actual one. Every situation that produces the disproportionate heat is a situation where something real in you is being required to disappear for the comfort of an arrangement that was built around the version of you that was easier to accommodate. This is the third sign. The anger that has no clean target has a very precise target. It is pointing at the gap between who you are and what you have been required to be. And that gap is not a character flaw. It is the specific distance that the individuation process is in the process of closing. Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you about the fourth sign is the part of this process that most people never receive a name for, and without the name, the experience of it is nearly unbearable. The fourth sign is the collapse of the thing that used to give your life direction, not direction in the practical sense, the deeper sense, the sense of knowing without having to think about it, without having to justify it, without having to reconstruct it from first principles every morning, why the effort matters. The purpose that was operating underneath everything, not the stated purpose, the one that was actually running the engine. For some people, it is the relationship they were oriented around, not just the relationship itself, but the specific meaning the relationship provided, the sense of being someone's person, of mattering to a specific other in a way that organized the self around something outside itself. For others, it is the work, not the job, but the narrative of the work, the story of who they were becoming through the doing of it, the identity that the work provided that the paycheck never quite captured. For others, it is something more abstract, a set of beliefs about what life is for, what growth looks like, what the good version of the future contains. Whatever it was, it provided orientation, and now something has happened to it. Not an event necessarily, just a shift, a morning where the thing that used to produce forward momentum did not produce it, and then another morning, and the specific confusion of a person who has lost the internal compass that has been pointing in a direction they trusted without fully examining. Jung called this the collapse of the provisional identity, the first adult self, assembled from the available materials of early life, adequate to the initial demands of existence, but not adequate to the larger demands that emerge in the second half. The collapse of the provisional identity is not a failure. It is the completion of one phase and the necessary clearance for the next. But it does not feel like completion. It feels like falling. It feels like standing in a life that is still structurally intact, and recognizing that the thing holding it together from the inside has gone quiet. And here is the crucial thing that nobody tells you. The thing that went quiet was not you. It was the first version of you, and the version that comes after is already forming, in the silence, in the discomfort, in the very confusion of this moment. But it cannot form while the old direction is still receiving all the available energy. The collapse is not the ending, it is the making of space. The fifth sign is the one that will sound the strangest, but that Jung considered among the most reliable indicators of genuine genuine individuation in progress. Your interior life has become more active, not in the way of productive thinking or planning or problem solving, in the way of images, dreams that are more vivid than they have been in years, sometimes disturbing, sometimes beautiful, sometimes simply strange in a way that leaves a residue on the day that follows. Recurring themes that appear in both the dreams and in the waking life, symbols that return without obvious connection to the conscious concerns of your daily existence. A quality of synchronicity in the outer world, not the magical thinking version, but the specific experience of the outer world, presenting you with precisely the right encounter or information at precisely the moment when your interior was oriented towards something it did not yet have language for. These experiences are not supernatural. They are the documented behavior of an unconscious that is pressing its contents toward conscious awareness with increasing urgency. Jung spent his career studying the specific language of the unconscious, the symbolic vocabulary through which it communicates what cannot be communicated through rational speech, and he found that the intensity of this communication increases dramatically during periods of active individuation. The dreams and the synchronicities and the recurring images are not decoration, they are data. The unconscious is not speaking in code to create mystery. It is speaking in the only language available to a part of the mind that does not operate through linear reasoning. The image that keeps returning, the dream that keeps coming back in different forms but with the same emotional core, the encounter that felt too precise to be coincidence but that you dismissed because coincidence was more comfortable than the alternative. These are not random, they are the unconscious completing a navigation that the conscious mind has not yet been able to undertake. And here is what most people do with them. They dismiss them, not out of ignorance exactly, but out of the specific discomfort of a mind that has learned to trust the rational and distrust the symbolic. Jung's response to that dismissal was precise. He said the unconscious does not stop communicating when it is dismissed. It simply communicates more loudly. The images become more insistent. The synchronicities become harder to explain away until the conscious mind either pays attention or pays the higher price of continuing to ignore what is being said. The fifth sign is your unconscious trying to show you what is next. The question is whether you are willing to look. The sixth sign is the loneliness, and I need to say something about this loneliness that distinguishes it from the loneliness of circumstance or isolation. This loneliness is not the absence of people. You may be surrounded by people who care about you. This loneliness is the specific experience of being in a place in yourself that no one around you has been given a map to, of carrying something interior that you cannot share with the people in your life, not because they would not try to understand, but because the territory you are in is not yet sufficiently formed to be put into words that would carry the actual weight of it. It is the loneliness of being between the person you were, whom everyone around you still knows and relates to, and the person you are becoming, who has not yet arrived fully enough to be introduced. Jung described this as the necessary solitude of individuation, not the imposed solitude of isolation, but the earned solitude of a self that is doing something that cannot be done in company. Every genuine transformation requires a period of this kind of aloneness, not because other people are excluded from the process, because the process requires a level of interior attention that cannot be sustained simultaneously with the social performance that company requires. You are not withdrawing from life. You are going deeper into it, into the specific, private, unshared layer of it where the work is actually done. The loneliness is real. Do not minimize it, but also do not misread it as evidence that something is wrong with your relationships or with you. It is evidence that something is happening in you that is larger than the social context can currently contain. Jung found this in every patient who was in the middle of genuine individuation. The loneliness was not a side effect. It was a specific condition of the process, because the person who emerges from genuine individuation has a relationship with themselves that they did not have before, a specific interior companionship that the aloneness of the process was necessary to develop. You are not alone because you are failing at connection. You are alone because you are developing the capacity for a depth of connection that the current version of your relationships has not yet been able to reach. The seventh sign is the one that changes everything about how you understand the first six. And I told you to stay for this. I need you to feel the weight of it before I name it. Because most people, when they hear it, feel something shift, not dramatically, in the specific, quiet way of something settling into a place it was always meant to occupy. The seventh sign is this. You cannot go back to who you were before this process began, not because you are better than that person, not because they were inadequate, inadequate or limited or not enough, but because something has been seen that cannot be unseen. Something has been felt that permanently changed the interior landscape. The question you started asking, not the philosophical version, the real one, the one that arrives in the specific quiet of a Tuesday afternoon when nothing dramatic is happening, and the question comes anyway. That question does not go back into the box once it has been asked. Who am I when I am not performing for anyone? What do I actually want when I remove the layer of what I am supposed to want? What would I build if I built it from the actual truth of what I am rather than from the available materials of what I was expected to become? These questions are not rhetorical. They are the active interior life of a person in the middle of genuine individuation, and Jung's most important observation about them is this: they are not questions that can be answered through thinking. They are questions that can only be answered through living, through the specific, unglamorous daily practice of making choices that are slightly more aligned with the actual self and slightly less aligned with the performed one. Not all at once, one choice, then another, until the gap between who you are and what you are living begins slowly to close. The inability to go back is not a loss. It is the specific irreversibility of genuine growth. You cannot unknow what you now know about yourself. You cannot unask the question that has been asked. And the only direction that is actually available to you, the only direction that does not cost you more than the direction itself, is forward, into the unknown self that is forming in the silence and the discomfort and the specific loneliness of this season. The seventh sign is the one that confirms all six that preceded it, not the confirmation you were hoping for, not relief or clarity, or the feeling that the difficult part is over. The confirmation that the difficult part is not a malfunction, it is the process, and you are in it, which means you are in exactly the right place. Carl Jung named this process individuation in 1916. He named it because he needed a word for something he had observed in his patients and in himself, something that had no adequate name in the psychological vocabulary of his time, something that was neither pathology nor ordinary development, but a third thing, a specific, demanding, irreplaceable process of becoming the person that was available to become from the very beginning, but that required the dissolution of the first adult self before it could arrive. He was careful about what he claimed for it. He did not say it guaranteed happiness. He did not say it produced a better person in the moral sense. He said it produced a whole person, not whole in the sense of having no wounds, whole in the sense of having integrated enough of the interior landscape, the conscious and the unconscious, the performed self and the shadow, the person who was built and the person who was available to be that. The life being lived from that wholeness had a quality of authenticity that the divided life could not produce. He also said it was rare. Not rare because most people are incapable of it. Rare because most people, at the threshold of the process, misread the signs and retreat. They identify the dissolution of the provisional identity as failure rather than completion. They interpret the relationship changes as damage rather than discernment. They manage the anger back into silence rather than following it to its source. They fill the silence rather than listening to what the silence contains. They dismiss the interior images rather than attending to the language the unconscious is using to communicate what it cannot say directly. And they return to the constructed life with a determination to make the old identity work harder rather than allowing the new one to form. Jung watched this happen repeatedly in his most capable and most self-aware patients, and he noted the specific cost of it, not dramatic, the cost of a life that continued to function while something essential in it remained permanently unexpressed. The cost of the performed self running to completion while the actual self waited not bitterly, not with accusation, with the specific patience of something that was built to last longer than the performance. The individuation process does not close because you decide not to proceed with it. It waits, it presses, it produces the seven signs in new forms through new seasons until either you attend to it or you die, having never attended to it. Jung did not believe the second option was tragic in a dramatic sense. He believed it was the most ordinary form of human suffering, so common that it had stopped being recognized as suffering. The life that was almost lived, the self that was almost met, the wholeness that was available and never claimed. Here is what the process actually requires, and I want to be specific because most descriptions of individuation remain abstract in ways that make the practical entry into it feel impossible. It requires one specific thing more than anything something else. Not courage in the conventional sense, not the courage to do something externally difficult, the courage to stop doing something internally automatic. The automatic thing is the management, the constant, sophisticated, deeply habitual management of the interior life, the editing of the actual experience before it reaches expression, the translation of the real feeling into the acceptable feeling, the conversion of the genuine response into the appropriate response. This management is not a choice you make each time. It became automatic so long ago that you do not experience it as management anymore. You experience it as your personality, as the particular way you are in the world, as the stable, reliable, predictable self that everyone around you has learned to count on. The courage that individuation requires is the courage to be slightly less managed, not completely unmanaged. That would not be individuation. It would be chaos, slightly less. In one specific moment, with one specific person, about one specific thing that the management has been covering. That moment does not produce immediate transformation. It produces a small and specific change in the interior relationship between the performed self and the actual one. And that change is real, and it compounds, because every time the management is slightly reduced and nothing catastrophic occurs, every time the real thing is slightly present and the relationship survives and the situation continues and the floor does not fall out, the nervous system learns something that no amount of intellectual understanding can teach it, that the actual self is survivable, that its presence in the world does not produce the consequences that the management was installed to prevent, that the thing you have been most carefully hiding is not the most dangerous thing about you. It may be the most important. The dangerous middle of the individuation process is the phase that nobody warns you about and that produces the highest rate of retreat. Jung called it the dark night of the ego, not the soul, specifically the ego, the period in which the first adult self has lost enough of its authority that it can no longer run the life on automatic, but the new self has not yet consolidated enough to provide reliable direction. You are between. The old map does not match the territory. The new map has not been drawn, and you are navigating in the gap between them with the specific, disorienting, frequently terrifying experience of someone who can no longer locate themselves in the landscape they have been living in, but cannot yet see the landscape they are moving toward. Most of the symptoms that bring people into therapy during the individuation process are symptoms of this phase. The loss of purpose, the inexplicable grief, the relationship changes that feel like damage, the anger that has no clean target, the inability to return to the things that used to provide meaning. These are not symptoms of pathology. They are symptoms of transition, and they are indistinguishable from pathology, from depression, from anxiety, from the clinical conditions that the DSM provides categories for, except in one specific way. The symptoms of genuine individuation respond to depth. When you go toward them, when you attend to them with the full weight of your honest attention, rather than trying to manage or eliminate them, they become navigational, they point, they inform, they contain, in their specific quality and location and intensity, information about what is being left behind and what is trying to arrive. The symptoms of clinical pathology do not have this quality. They do not become navigational when attended to. They require different intervention. If you are uncertain which is happening to you, the uncertainty itself is information. Clinical pathology does not usually produce the quality of interior awareness that generates that uncertainty. The awareness of the question is often a sign that you are in the process, not in the pathology. What is dying in you is not what you fear is dying. This is the thing most people going through individuation need to hear directly, and almost no one says directly. The fear underneath all 7 signs is specific. The fear is that what is dying is the capacity to connect, to be loved, to belong, to function effectively in the world, to be the person that the people who love you need you to be. The fear is that the process is making you into someone who is more alone, more difficult, more unfamiliar, more lost than the person who went into it. Jung's observation about this fear is the most important thing he ever wrote about individuation. He said the fear is wrong, not in the sense that nothing dies. Things die. The provisional identity dies. The automatic management dies. The specific forms of connection that were built around the performed self die. These are real deaths, and they involve real grief. But what does not die, what in fact becomes more available as these things die, is the capacity for genuine connection, the capacity for love that does not require you to disappear inside it, the capacity for belonging that is based on something real about you rather than something constructed, the capacity for functioning not from the performance of competence but from the actual ground of a self that knows what it is and what it is for. These capacities do not arrive fully formed on the other side of the process. They develop through it, through every moment of slightly reduced management, through every relationship that survives the dissolution of the performance, through every conversation that reaches something real because the performed version was not there to intercept it first. The person on the other side of genuine individuation is not more alone. They are less alone in the deepest sense, connected to themselves in a way that makes connection with others possible at a depth that the divided self could not access. This does not make the process easier, but it makes it worth the difficulty in a way that nothing happening on the surface of it currently suggests. The price of not going through it is not dramatic and not immediate. Jung was careful about this. He did not say that the person who retreats from individuation suffers obviously or continuously or in ways that others can easily identify. He said the price is specific. The life that continues is functional. The person who retreats constructs from the ruins of the provisional identity a new provisional identity, sometimes more sophisticated, sometimes more defended. They continue to perform, to connect, to achieve, to build, and underneath all of it, with the specific persistence of something that does not accept permanent suppression, the actual self continues to press. Not with the urgency of the active individuation process. The urgency was what made the symptoms so disorienting. With something quieter and more sustained. A low-level awareness, almost never fully surfaced, almost never fully named, that the life being lived is not the life that was available, not a failure, not a wrong turn, not a life without genuine value or genuine love or genuine moments of aliveness, but not complete, not the full expression of what was there to be expressed, not the wholeness that was available. Jung saw this in patients who came to him in their 60s and 70s, not in crisis, not in dramatic suffering, but with the specific gravity of someone who had arrived at the end of a substantial life and was performing the accounting in the way that substantial lives eventually require. Not accounting for achievement or failure in the conventional sense. Accounting for expression, for how much of what was actually there had been allowed to be actually there. For the distance between the life that was lived and the life that was available to be lived. He did not find this accounting uniformly sorrowful. Sometimes it produced peace, a specific peace of someone who, looking back, could see that enough of the actual self had made it through the performance to constitute something real. Sometimes it did not. Sometimes it produced what Jung described as the most painful form of human regret. Not the regret of specific wrong decisions. The regret of a self that was never quite fully met. That arrived in the world with something to offer and left with most of it still packed. You are not in your 60s or 70s. You are here in this specific season, with the accounting still entirely before you, with the 7 signs actively present, with the process alive and pressing and available to be engaged rather than managed away. Jung said that when the psyche presents the individuation process, it presents it for a reason, not randomly. At the moment when the first adult self has accumulated enough of its own evidence to be examined honestly, when the gap between the performed self and the actual one has become visible enough that the seeing cannot be entirely avoided, when the specific conditions for genuine transformation are present, not comfortable, not convenient, not designed to fit into the existing schedule of a well-organized life, but present, real, available. The 7 signs you are carrying are not a problem list. They are a readiness assessment. The psyche does not press this hard unless the capacity to do something with the pressing is also present. The discomfort is proportional to the readiness. The fact that you recognized yourself in 7 specific signs rather than in 1 or 2 is not evidence that you are in more trouble than someone who recognized themselves in fewer. It is evidence that the process is further along, that more has been released, that the new self is closer to consolidation than the disorientation of this phase makes it possible to feel. Here is what you do now. Not with the whole process, with today, with this specific moment in the specific life you are currently living. One thing. Stop managing one thing that you have been managing, not everything. One specific thing that you will recognize immediately when you ask yourself what it is. The one that has required the most consistent effort to keep invisible. The one whose management has been the most exhausting. The one that, if it were allowed to simply be present without the performance covering it, would change something about how you exist in a specific relationship or a specific environment. environment. Allow that one thing to be slightly more present, not dramatically, not in a way designed to produce a response, simply present, without the management intercepting it before it reaches the surface. Watch what happens, not to the other person, to you, to the specific interior experience of a self that has been held at a distance from its own expression for long enough that the experience of even slight, unmanaged presence is unusual enough to register as significant. That registration is the process, not the dramatic versions of it. That specific, quiet, slightly uncomfortable experience of being slightly more real in one moment than you were in the moment before it. Jung said individuation does not happen in breakthroughs. It happens in these moments, accumulated over time. Each one small enough to be sustainable, each one real enough to change the interior relationship between the performed self and the actual one. Each one a degree of closing in the gap between who you are and what you have been living. You are already in the process. The 7 signs are the evidence. The question that remains, the one Jung never fully resolved for anyone because it cannot be resolved from the outside, is whether you are going to engage it consciously or continue managing it unconsciously. Both paths continue. Only one of them leads somewhere you actually want to go. Something in you is dying right now. You already knew that when this began. What you know now that you did not know, then is what is dying and what it is making room for. The dying is not the end. The dying is the work. And the work is the beginning of the only version of your life that was ever actually going to be yours. The question that stays, the one this video cannot answer for you, the one that only your own honest interior attention can eventually answer, is whether the person forming in the silence of this process is someone you are willing to meet, not someone you are willing to become in the abstract, someone you are willing to meet in the specific, ordinary daily moments that constitute a life. That willingness is not courage in the heroic sense. It is the much quieter, much more sustainable, much more difficult courage of someone who has decided that the actual self is worth showing up as, even before they have finished finding out what the actual self is.